Hello friends, welcome to my channel Clinical Biochemistry by Dr. P.K. Prabhakar. I'm going to start a series of lectures on the carbohydrate metabolism, and I'll give you a brief description about this, what are this series contents, and how we are going to have different videos on that one. Before that one, just let us understand what is carbohydrate and what is its significance. So if you'll say carbohydrate, this is one of the important macromolecules in our body. Roughly, you might be knowing that we are having four macromolecules in our body, and these are carbohydrates, uh, proteins, then we are having lipids and nucleic acids. Carbohydrate is one of the important macromolecules we are having, and later on we will have a different series of lectures on other macromolecules also, their metabolic processes also. Fine. In this series, I'm not going to talk about the structural components, structural elucidation of carbohydrates and their characteristic features. So mainly we will focus on the metabolic processes and abnormalities. If you see the sources of carbohydrates, we are having maximum sources for carbohydrates only. Uh, that is, we are having brown rice, beans, pasta, raspberry, number of fruits. Wherever you might have heard about that we are having sweetening agents, there we are having carbohydrates. And whatever you are going to see, these are the amount of carbs present in that particular food. If you'll see the basic classification of carbohydrates, carbohydrates have different way of classifications. I have seen number of videos on these carbohydrates structural elucidations. So basically, carbohydrates are going to be classified into three broad classes, and that is monosaccharides, oligosaccharides, and polysaccharides. Some books you can have monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Some books we have four different classes: monosaccharide, oligosaccharide, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. So these are the all these things are mentioned there. Monosaccharides normally where only one unit of carbohydrates will be there, only one unit of carbohydrates will be there, and it cannot be further metabolized. So that is called as monosaccharides. These monosaccharides can be divided into two classes, or on the basis of the functional groups. If it will have aldehyde, it is called as aldose, and if it is having ketone group, it is called as ketose. Similarly, same monosaccharides can be classified on different groups on the basis of number of carbons also, like minimum number of carbohydrates will have, that is 3. So we can have triose, tetrose, pentose, hexose, like that one. That is depending on the number of carbons. Then when we are talking about oligosaccharides, in this case we are having disaccharides and trisaccharides, where carbohydrate units will be 2 or 3. And again, these can have reducing or non-reducing also. uh, so only monosaccharides and disaccharides have two classes, means reducing and non-reducing. Normally all the polysaccharides, oligosaccharides are non-reducing sugar only. And then we are having polysaccharides, where multiple units of carbohydrates will join together and forms a large chain of carbohydrates. So it can be the similar type of units, or it can be a different type of unit. So we are having homopolysaccharides and heteropolysaccharides, and they have different functions also. So when we are going, we will see later on, we will see the significance of carbohydrates. So if we are going to see what is the carbohydrate metabolic processes or metabolism, carbohydrate metabolism is one of the fundamental biochemical process which ensures the continuous supply of energy in almost all the living cells. If we'll see the metabolic process, there are certain cellular organelles where metabolic process takes place, like cytoplasm, and another important cell organelle is mitochondria. So some metabolic process takes place into the cytoplasm, and some metabolic process takes place into the mitochondria. So there are number of cells we are having where mitochondria is not present, like RBC is one of the prime example. So in all the cells where either mitochondria there or mitochondria is absent there, but there they need energy. And glycolysis is the most important process which supply energy into almost all the cells. Either they have mitochondria or they don't have mitochondria. But glycolysis takes place in almost all the cells. So the most important carbohydrate is glucose, and that is going to be degraded through glycolysis, which occurs in almost all the cells. After the glycolysis, components or whatever metabolic process we are getting, that is called pyruvic acid, that enters into the Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle or tricarboxylic acid cycle, and then through oxidative phosphorylation we get synergy. So this is the summary of this metabolic process. Like we are having glucose, it is going to metabolize. Glucose is 6 carbon sugar, so we are going to have pyruvic acid. This pyruvic acid enter into mitochondria, and then it will be metabolized through citric acid cycle like here, and we are going to get it ATP through oxidative phosphorylation. So three major reactions are: one is glycolysis, which takes place into the cytoplasm, then we are having Krebs cycle, which occurs in the mitochondrial matrix, and then we are having oxidative phosphorylation, or it is also called as electron transport chain, that is present on mitochondrial inner membrane. So this is the basic reactions. If we'll say we are having glucose, which is going to be metabolized into pyruvic acid and further through Krebs cycle, acetyl coenzyme and Krebs cycle, and gives energy. Surplus amount of glucose in our body is going to be stored in the form of glycogen, and whenever body does not have sufficient amount of glucose, these glycogens are going to be broken down to glucose. So the synthesis, this process where glucose is going to be broken down to pyruvic acid, this is called as glycolysis. When glucose is converted to glycogen, this is called as glycogenesis, the synthesis of glycogen. And when glycogen is broken down into the glucose, it is called as glycogenolysis. Then we are having this further metabolized into the carbon dioxide and water because of carbon. And uh, whenever we eat food, plant sources, vegetable foods, so plant have the stored food that is in the form of starch or cellulose, and these starches are going to be metabolized and gives us glucose. These glucose also provides us some other forms of carbohydrates, like one important thing is 5 carbon sugar, that is called as ribose sugar, and that is through pentose phosphate pathway or EMP pathway. Number of other biomolecules also involved in the glucose synthesis whenever body requires glucose. Like we are having lactic acid, amino acid, glycerol, or number of other amino acids also. So this is gluconeogenesis. So these are the some of the metabolic process, and all either going to merge at glucose, or glucose provides us those biomolecules. So glucose is the central point for all the metabolic reactions. So glucose is metabolized to pyruvic acid through different sequential reactions. That is the 10-step reactions. We will have a later on video on that one. And then some other carbohydrates like galactose or fructose also enters into the glycolytic pathway at different levels. Like galactose gives us glucose 6 phosphate, and that enters into the glycolytic pathway. Fructose enters into the glycolysis as fructose 6 phosphate pathway, and then gives us glycolysis. Whenever body requires this pyruvic acid or acetyl coenzyme or other biomolecules converted back to glucose through gluconeogenesis process, and then glycogen is going to be synthesized through glucose 1 phosphate, glucose 6 phosphate. So glucose to glucose 6 phosphate, and then glycogen through glycogenesis, and it will be broken down through glycogenolysis. So this is the summary of carbohydrate metabolic process. So we are having glucose here, and this glucose is going to be metabolized to pyruvic acid through glucose 6 phosphate, and then other process, and gives us it energy process, energy component. Whenever body requires this pyruvic acid converted back to glucose 6 phosphate, and then further to glucose via gluconeogenesis process. This pyruvic acid also functions as the reservoir or the source substrate or the precursor for number of other components. Like it gives us alanine, it gives us a number of other metabolites. So pyruvic acid works as the reservoir. This glucose 6 phosphate converted to pentose phosphate or the ribose sugar, just now we have seen 5 carbon sugar, through pentose phosphate pathway, and that is the for nucleotide synthesis, RNA DNA synthesis. Then this glucose 6 phosphate also forms glycogen through glycogenesis, glycogenolysis when it will be degraded, and pyruvic acid enters into the TCA cycle through acetyl coenzyme and provides us ATP. So this is roughly summary of carbohydrate metabolic processes. There are a number of significance are there for carbohydrate. It does not provide only energy. Other than energy productions, carbohydrates also have number of other roles, like It works as a storage of energy such as glucose and glycogen. It also works as a structural component like skin, bone, cell membranes. It involves in cell to cell interactions. Their derivatives are drug like erythromycins. Number of glycoproteins we are having, number of glycolipids we are having. Survival of Antarctic fish in icy environment is due to the presence of anti-freezing glycoprotein in their blood. Ascorbic acid, which is also a derivative of carbohydrate, that is a water-soluble vitamins. So, other than that one, number of other fat or other biomolecules also we get from the carbohydrate only. These carbohydrates or these glucose in our body are going to be maintained at a sufficient level or at a particular range by very number of hormones we are having or number of other systems we are having. One of the important regulation is through hormones, that is called as hormonal regulations. So two important hormone we are having which regulates this glucose level in our body. One is insulin and second one is glucagon. Both are produced through pancreatic cells. This is pancreatic beta cells and this is pancreatic alpha cells which produces that one. Whenever body have sufficient or more than the required amount of glucose, pancreas produces insulin and insulin increases the glucose utilizations. So glucose it pulled back to the normal level. And whenever body have a lower level of glucose, hypoglycemic conditions, that time pancreas produces glucagon, and glucagon increases glucose production and reduces glucose metabolic processes. We will see this one through hormonal regulations. So I have a number of videos on that one in this series. So the first video we will talk about the basic metabolic process which just now I have discussed, and the second video I will have on the glycolysis where we will talk about the different steps of glycolysis where glucose will be converted to pyruvic acid, their regulations, their energy productions. uh, so all these related things we will talk about. Then the third video I will have on the pyruvate dehydrogenase, which is one of the important enzymes for the um, glycogenolysis reactions, where which connects between the glycolysis and the Krebs cycle. And this enzyme is one of the main enzyme which joins the cytoplasmic parts of the glycolysis carbohydrate metabolic process plus the mitochondrial part of the glycolytic reaction, carbohydrate metabolic process. So we will see the pyruvic acid dehydrogenase and their regulations, because this is a large enzyme which is having 5 different components, and all components are important. Number of regulators, number of cofactors it requires. Then we will have a video on Krebs cycle. This is also a 8 to 10 step reactions. We will have a regulatory steps and major energy production through this process only. So we will try to decode the Krebs cycle. Then we will have another video on electron transport chain or oxidative phosphorylation, which is present on the mitochondrial inner membrane. There we will see how 4 components works in these sequences and how it gives us energy. Then we will have a video on gluconeogenesis through different non-carbohydrate sources. So the synthesis of glucose by different sources other than the carbohydrate and their regulations. Then we will have two important process for glycogen metabolic processes, which is glycogen synthesis, that is glycogenesis, and degradation of glycogen, that is glycogenolysis. So we will see the both glycogen metabolic process and synthetic process. Then we will talk about the hormonal regulation of carbohydrate, mainly through insulin and glucagon, how hormones regulates it, maintains. Number of other hormones are also there, but these are the two important hormones. Then we will talk about the diabetes, one of the important disease related to carbohydrate metabolic process. And then we will talk about see the how carbohydrate metabolism is associated with exercise. Then we have another video on weight management through carbohydrate metabolic processes. What is the relationship and how we can work on weight management by different dietary fibers and glycemic index of food and other things. And in the last video of this series, we will talk about the different disorders of carbohydrate metabolic processes. And then, if we will have time, we will also talk on the lactose metabolic process, lactose intolerance, and other processes. So, this is all about this series. Hope to see you in the next video. If you are not subscribed my channel, you can subscribe it. If you like the video, press the like button. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.